Welcome everyone. My name is Hinga. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Welcome to the Community Infrastructure Grant session tonight. So before I get started, I'd like to Council acknowledges the Wadawurrung traditional owners of this land and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are part of the Greater Geelong community today. So before we get started, I just want to let you know that I've got a couple of other presenters joining me tonight. I've got Scott from our social planning and investment team. So Scott's going to be talking tonight about the planning process and all the key aspects to a project. We've got Paul's from the community and recreation team. So he'll be joining us tonight, and Paul will be talking about the well-planned process of a project, and also looking at the application form and so on. So what we've done at other sessions, so this is our number 6 session. It's great that everybody's been able to come out tonight and join us tonight. I know everybody's been really busy at this time, so I really appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight. So what we've asked at previous sessions is that if we can ask people if they could pop their microphones on mute, and I think most people have done that, so thank you very much. Another thing that we've been asking people to do is if they could put the name of their club or group and their project in the chat box, which is at the bottom of your screen. If you can pop that in there, it just gives us a bit of an idea about our audience, so that we know that the information that we're presenting tonight, that it's hitting the mark. The questions, how we manage the questions is they're going to answer questions at the end of the session. So you're most welcome to put your question in the chat box. We've got Britt joining us tonight. So Britt's the person that's been driving our presentation and the Zoom session. So Britt will monitor all the questions that will come in, and she'll raise them at the end of the session. So if you want to pop it in the chat box, that's great. Or if not, you can wait until the end of the session. So tonight's presentation will take about an hour and a half or even less. That includes question time. Also letting you all know that this session is being recorded, and it will be uploaded onto the Geelong Australia website for others to view, and also for you to go back if you need to, to clarify with anything that we talked about at tonight's session. So thanks, Britt. So we'll get going. So the session tonight will cover the essentials on how to manage a construction project or feasibility study, looking at a planning project. It talks about all the different types of quotes, the scope of works, the importance of that, plans and drawings and sketchings. It also talks about stakeholder support and how important that is, especially if you're sharing a facility with a co-tenant, budget, and of course the project rationale. So our presenters tonight will guide you through the key aspects of the application form, explaining each section and providing you with some valuable hints and tips. There are 3 components for tonight's session. First component being planning, talking about submitting an application, and the well-planned project assessment. So what are the community infrastructure grants? So the grants are aimed at supporting the planning and delivery of projects that aim to look at upgrading or renovating or constructing new and existing community facilities within the City of Greater Geelong. The projects must be community-led initiatives. We find that because this allows groups to provide a better level of service, you have a greater understanding of the services that you provide, you understand the needs of your services that you deliver, and you understand the space and the functions that you require. Priority will be given to projects that increase community access, increase participation, is able to demonstrate that collaboration between groups, especially if you're sharing a facility with another user group or a tenant, how well, that you all work well together, and the benefit of the project that you're putting forward, how it's going to benefit all the users in that facility or on that precinct, because that often results in better utilisation of the facility. The expected program outcomes, we have to see greater opportunities for community members to be involved in community life. We ask that community infrastructures to be more accessible, equitable and affordable to all people within our community. We look at the improved facilities and community spaces which cultivate the learning and knowledge, and also looking at the existing local cultural, environmental and sporting facilities for increased utilisation and functionality. So as you probably know, that there are two funding categories in this bucket of funding. So the first category is planning grants up to 50,000, and capital works grants amount up to 350,000. I'm not going to go into much detail with these categories because I know Scott and Paul will provide you with a lot more detail. So they'll talk more about it when it gets to them. So what type of projects has this funding has it funded in the past? So it's done facility upgrades, fit outs of a canteen, kitchen, community centre extension, sport and recreation, could be lighting projects. Senior clubs have had some kitchen upgrades, accessible toilets. We've had projects come across our way around solar panels, air conditioning, for sporting facilities. We've had upgrades to social rooms. It might be an upgrade to a female-friendly change rooms, putting in place a new scoreboard and a new sports lights. So here are some photos of some past projects that have been funded. Here we've got the Heighton Bowling Club. They had their shade structures completed last year. The Geelong Falcons had some new lighting put up. The Serbian Club at Sutcliffe Reserve in Corio had an accessible ramp put in place. The Clifton Springs Bowling Club, they had the new accessible toilet just recently completed, so they're really excited about that. We've got here the Leopold Memorial Shelter and of course the Ocean Grove Surf Lifesaving Lookout, which has now finished. But we've funded a number of projects, so this is just an example of some of the projects that have been funded in the past. Some important information, as you will already know, that the grant applications close for this bucket of funding at 5 p.m. on Monday the 12th of October. I'm sure most of you have already been looking, have a good understanding what your project's going to be. Probably have an understanding about what you need in terms of quotes, what sort of information needed if it's a planning application. So it's really important that we're asking people to really not leave their grant applications to the last week. We've had people in the past where they've really rushing around for some quotes, maybe a week or two before the closing date. It's really important that people, are doing that work now. As you know, you would have had a copy of the grant guidelines, which is available on the Geelong Australia website. One of the things that we're doing this year in particular is to provide more support to groups and community and sporting clubs for people to discuss their project proposal, whether it be a planning proposal or a capital project. So if you're wanting someone to talk to about your idea or your proposal, please send an email to our grants team or give them a call. What they'll do is that they will refer you on to Paul's team or Scott's team, and they'll be able to talk to you and help you with any questions that you may have. General grant writing workshops, we've had Leisure Network have just delivered 4 grant writing workshops, so they were really successful. So we're thinking that, not sure if we're going to run any more, but we're going to have a conversation about that. But if you need some, I encourage you to contact Leisure Networks. So that's really my part of the presentation. I want to wish you all the very best with your application. I'm going to pass you on to Scott now, and he's going to start talking about the planning process. Good luck, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Hinga. Just checking that you're hearing me okay.
Yep, all good.
All good, Scott.
Great. All right. If we can move on to our first slide for planning. Excellent. All right. So thanks, everyone. Look, I'm the Senior Sport and Rec Planner in the Sport and Rec team, and I guess part of our role is making sure that projects are really well planned and thought out before they get to construction phase. So my presentation tonight is just a few slides just to talk about where your project is at in that sort of planning life cycle. So it's a really critical phase to get that planning right. And I know a lot of groups often want to sort of jump straight to the construction and delivery. But there's a number of steps in the planning phase that if we don't get them right, or if they're not well thought out, it can lead to many problems when we actually get to construction. So it's really essential that you understand where your project's at, and if you are at construction, hopefully that means you've already been through a good planning phase. Or if you're just thinking about an idea for a project, then one of the best things to do is to look at applying for one of the planning grants first up. Our team in Sport and Rec, but the broader social planning investment team, as Hinga said, can help out with the projects in providing any other advice that you might need around those, or any other sort of technical information that you might want to ask us as well. So look, in terms of the grants, as Hinga said, there's those two types. There's the strategic planning and then the sort of infrastructure planning in the sort of planning phase. And particularly what that is going to help you do is really define that scope, really understand the costs well, and all the requirements of your project. So look, the strategic planning projects, I'm not sure, just having a quick look at the chat before, if anyone fits into this category. These are really about sort of broader blue sky sort of thinking. It's longer term planning, things like a sort of 5-year strategic plan for, you know, a club and its facilities. It might be a sort of longer term facility development plan, or it might be just looking at the feasibility of a particular idea or initiative that you're wanting to investigate. We often, in our grants, look to see what sort of strategic plans are in place. So if you've got a plan like that, it's going to really help reinforce and back up your project. So if you don't have that sort of thing in place, then yeah, it's definitely a good idea to consider putting in for this type of project. In a similar way to what Hinga was talking about in terms of leisure networks helping, we certainly suggest that's another option for connecting in with them to help with strategic planning and governance type projects as well. So the numbers there on the screen, if you want to get that written down, that's certainly a good resource for you. To complete projects such as facility development plans or feasibility studies, you'll generally need to appoint some sort of specialist consultant. So the grant that you might apply for this type of project would really be then used to engage a specialist consultant to undertake that work. And again, we can sort of help with those sort of projects, and you know how those briefs and stuff would be prepared and written up. So in terms of the planning process between sort of infrastructure and asset planning, so this is, I guess, ideally sort of the next sort of step once you've had a broader strategic plan in place. And this is normally around more specific infrastructure requirements. So it might be more what a number of you are sort of thinking of putting in for at the planning level. So things like, you know, the pavilions or sports lights, those types of projects. again, in a similar way to the more strategic planning projects, these will still require that funding really to help pay for the services of architects or engineers to really further develop your concepts and put together sort of cost plans for those projects. Again, I think one of the important things to do as part of your grant application is to really look for references in the council plan or the fair play policy or other G21 plans and strategies across Geelong, basically looking for things that are going to reinforce and back up your project to help give it a better chance of being successful. Again, we can help with those projects and making sure that what you're sort of wanting to get together is within the context of the grants and any sort of technical advice that you might require. So in terms of the sort of planning and project process, what we're really looking at is if you're successful in a grant, you would initially engage a sort of specialist consultant to do that kind of work around, whether it's a strategic plan, facility development plan, or the feasibility studies, as I said before. It really then moves into, that infrastructure planning to appoint, the specialist architects or engineers to work up those concept plans and cost plans. I guess particularly on the cost plans, one of the things that we find really useful to build into those types of planning projects is a quantity survey, which is really a specialist piece of work to develop up the costs based on your concepts and your plans. So that way they have a lot of experience looking at similar sorts of projects and can make sure that all the sorts of things are considered and that there's no sort of missing gaps when we then get to apply for construction money and we don't then find ourselves being short. Finally, we get to the actual delivery phase where we'll work with our capital works team and the clubs to do any of the further detailed design and then move into the actual delivery of those projects. So that's pretty much the summary of sort of the planning aspects of your work. And yeah, as I said again, reach out to us via the grants team if you're looking for any other advice around projects in these categories. Thanks.
Thanks, Scott. Now I'll take over from here, and what I'm going to talk about is probably planning more specific to your project and what you need for the application. Obviously, submitting the application and the assessment criteria and what the assessors are looking for as part of the when assessing the applications to sift through to find the ones that are successful. And what I'd like to do, and I'd use this as a prompt just to start off the session. And I'm looking at the front page now of the grants page when you go into Smarty Grants. And the reason I do this is to recommend it. Have a look at that. Download the preview form. I would recommend you do that as soon as you can. If you're thinking about applying for a grant, download that. Have a look at the form. Have a look at the requirements. Make sure you know what you need. Write a list if you have to of what you need as part of the requirements so that you can have them in place and tick them off along the way, and you're not left at the last minute to try and race out and get a letter of support or something else, a landowner consent, for instance, at the last minute. So do that early. Check out everything you need, have an understanding of the questions that we're asking you. Then I would recommend that you get those questions and put them into a Word document, and you can start working on them from the right from the get-go. While you're waiting for your quotes and getting your plans and all that drawn up, you can be already working on your application. Means that at the end of it, you're not stressed out worrying about what you're going to write. A lot of times you know exactly what you want to write and it comes into your head at some stage and you think that's fantastic. Get it down in words then and there rather than waiting until you start the application and you go blank. It's a good way to do it. It means you've got it for any other application if for instance, hopefully you're not, if you're unsuccessful, but it means you've got it ready to go for the next time. But you can then simply cut and paste it into the application at the time to go. As mentioned before, there's two funding categories available, 50,000 for planning, or $350,000, or up to 350,000, I should say, for capital works infrastructure. Now, in both cases, they require a 2-to-1 ratio where the city will fund 2/3 of the project, and with the club or group to source the other 1/3. Now, that can be from another grant funding source, or it can be part of in kind if that works for a certain club and they've got people that can do the works in kind. Or cash, but to be clear, you can use in-kind works for as a contribution of your thing. Very hard in the planning stage, obviously, but in the capital works infrastructure, if you've got the capability to do it and the club's got the resources, it can be used as part of the 1/3 contribution. Alternatively, there is an option, and council recognises in some of the bigger projects that clubs want to achieve that. And if we're talking up to $350,000, we recognise the fact that there's plenty of clubs out there that haven't got $100,000 sitting in their bank account ready to contribute to a project. Great if you can, and it means you're in a really good position. But we do have the option of applying for an exemption for the match funding ratio, and that allows us to, what we need you to do in that is get onto that fairly quickly, get onto the grants team, ask them for a form that you fill in for an exemption from the match funding, and you explain why you can't afford to put in the full amount of 1/3 and what you can put in and the reasons. Now we'll look at, we'll need to see some of the financials, and we'll assess your club based on turnover and how much you got in the bank, more probably about turnover and the capability to actually get the funds together to put in for it, and so it's all based on the actual cost of the project. There's other things that get taken into account, like for instance, if you're in a lower socio-economic area and therefore you can't charge the bit higher in the memberships and that sort of thing. So we take all that into account where you are. If you're a new and emerging club that's trying to get off the ground and you need the infrastructure to help develop your club, and obviously haven't had the time to raise that amount of funding, it all gets taken into account on how much your project is, how much you can apply for, and how much the club's got the capability of putting in the assessment. Do that early, because what we do is we assess that initially quite quickly, and we'll get back to you so that by the time you apply for the project, you should be aware of whether you can match the funding, and then when the project's assessed, it's assessed based on the project and not how much the club's putting in or anything like that. As far as quotes and requirements go, with infrastructure planning, if you're applying for a planning project up to 25,000, you'll require one quote, and you'll need the approval letters of support and landowner approval or confirmation if it's not on council land, and support from your co-tenants. Now, I'll just say this probably once at the start because it gets a little bit repetitive, but the approval letters of, or landowner support, if you're not on council land, and there are a number of examples of people that are on Crown land that's managed not by council, you need to get that landowner consent and get a letter from them to say they support the project, just so as we're aware, and there's no surprises at the end. Support from the co-tenants is the same. If you've got co-tenants in your building, we need to know that they support the project and there's not going to be any issues as you start to build or construct, and even better, if they're in support and it's going to benefit them, fantastic, because it means that your project benefits more than just the one club, which is great when we're assessing it. So do that. Get those in. You'll require that no matter what amount of dollars you're seeking, and we go from there. So For infrastructure planning, 25 to 50,000, you'll need the 3 quotes and of course the approvals, letters of support and landowner confirmation. For capital projects and delivery, up to $25,000, you'll just need the 1 quote. You'll need your plans and designs and your approval letters and landowner confirmation. For capital projects up to $150,000, you'll need 3 quotes. You'll need your plans and designs and the approval letters. And also in addition to that, you'll need to nominate a project manager and provide us with a QV. If you're getting up there in the dollar figure as far as a project that's getting quite complex, we want to know that the project manager who's going to look after your project, if the club is delivering it themselves, and there is that option, I'll talk about that a little bit later, we need to see that that person is capable of and potentially has managed projects of a similar size or in the past, just to know that we're not setting the club up for failure. We're quite happy to manage the project within council, but obviously sometimes there's a lot of advantages for the club to manage it themselves, especially if they have in-kind components included in their project. And now for capital projects up to 350,000, you'll need 3 quotes, you'll need the plans and designs, and you'll need a quantity surveyor's report or QS. And as Scott mentioned that earlier in his chat, that a quantity surveyor's report is basically an independent assessment of what the cost of your project would be based on whether it's a concept designs or the plans, and they use previous experience and bill of quantities to estimate how much your project will cost. And the critical thing there is that they put in everything, and as opposed to sometimes getting a quote that might not allow for, I don't know, if it's a lighting project, for instance, they might not allow for a power upgrade in the quote, or they might not allow for some detailed design works or the building permits, that sort of thing. So what I would say here is that when you're putting in your application, that you include, or the dollar amount you ask for is based on the quantity surveyor's report and not the quotes that accompany it. Obviously, as I said, then moving on, you'll need the approval letters of support and the landowner's confirmation, as well as a QV of the nominated project manager. Now, it's important to note here that if your project's deemed to be high risk, it will be managed by the City of Grey Geelong. An example of that is sports lighting. We would much prefer, and probably a requisite, that we project manage any sports lighting projects. Now I'll move on to the application and some of the things, and I'll jump around a little bit here with the application and the assessment criteria, but this is just where I'm talking about the application. It's talking about a specific question in the application, and we've got the main questions here, and the sort of thing we're looking for in that question or in the response from the club or group. Now, in most cases, I think we've limited to the answer to around 200 words. You definitely don't need to use the full 200. You just need to be succinct and tell us what your project is. So what we're looking for is a description of the project, what you were doing, how much it will cost, why is it needed, and the details of the quotes and drawings of the plans that you've obtained. Now, and probably to expand on this further and look at what the assessment criteria is and what they're looking for as far as the key elements. It's basically a scope of works, and what that is a provision of a clear breakdown of the major tasks, activities associated with the proposed works. And an example of that would be for a lighting design, it would be design, supply and installation of new 100 lux sports lights to Oval 1, including associated power supply, switchboard works and removal of existing sports lights. Or another one is design and construction to upgrade your existing facility to include new female change rooms, commercial kitchen, an outdoor barbecue area with seating, sealed car park and landscaping works. That's a brief detail of what your works is, which includes everything that you're going to do and gives us an immediate understanding of what your project is. As far as the project application goes, in the project rationale, that simple question in that section, we're looking for why the works are required, whether it be a lack of facilities, growth of the organisation, whether it's a health and safety reason, whether the project's required to increase participation or social inclusion, or the asset currently doesn't meet the standards. As I said before, be succinct and to the point. Tell us what it will do for your organisation and what it will mean for your organisation. Who will it advantage within the organisation if there is a specific target audience, and that would be either potentially, females, junior teams, an increase in participation if you're in a sporting club. It may be pointed at your social activities, so it might be more pointed at upgrading your facilities to increase your social activities. It may be that the revenue will be passed on to members through membership reduction, or it may be the ability to hold functions. But just tell us what it means to your club and why you want this project, and you are the best person to do that. Sometimes clubs have a little bit of trouble getting this down on in words, but the fact is that you know your club, and this is one of the reasons I suggested earlier about the Word document, because at some stage the light bulb will go off in your head and you'll get ideas of what it'll mean to the club, or you'll be sitting around at the committee meeting. You know the answers to these questions, and it's what about, if we got this, how good would it be? That sort of question. And this is what we want to know here, what it means to your club. As far as the assessment criteria, what we're looking for when we're looking at the assessment of a well-planned project is we're looking for stakeholder support. We're looking for letters of support for the proposed works from your co-tenants and the land manager where it's relevant. We're looking for plans and drawings. Engineering or architectural plans are recommended for all projects, but as a minimum sketches. And we understand that some of the smaller projects don't need to go to that detail, and sometimes it's a bit challenging. I know that in the case of shed works and that sort of thing, you can't get plans for a shed because the shed company won't release them until you pay the dollars up front to get that. So we need sketches of what the sizes are, what the dimensions are you're looking for, so as we can get a good understanding of what your project is and how big it is and what it involves. In principle support, and this is talking about on council land. So what we'd like you to do if you're doing a project on council land is contact the grants team to arrange a meeting. They will contact myself or my team and let us know what you're looking for and what your project is, and we will put together the right people to come out on site, have a look at your project, and get a good understanding of the implications or things that might be affected by your project. Now, it's really important to do this early in the application period, so as you can, of the certain little things that you might need to add to your project. Things like considering if trees are going to be required to be removed. We need to know this early so as we can get our tree guys out on site and get the approval for that, or understand if there's going to be tree offsets, for instance, which means that if you take one tree down, potentially sometimes we can get approval for a tree to be removed, but it requires that we have to plant 6 trees somewhere in the reserve to offset that lost tree. So that's an example of one of the things we get out on site, get an understanding so as it can be included in your project. There may be other things like services or existing buildings or assets that may be impacted that we need to know early so as that we can get approval. We'll also have our property people out there, and they'll get a good understanding of the project and make sure it's the building, for instance, is structurally sound, and things like if you're doing a solar paneling project, well, we need to know early days that the roof's structurally sound to take the panels. In the application, it'll ask you the question of who's been consulted and collaborated within the project. This is where we're looking for those that you've talked to your co-tenants, you've talked to your landowner and other stakeholders within your building or use. Sometimes it's not necessarily co-tenants, but it's other stakeholders that might be involved. It could be that you've consulted with, I don't know, an example that might be if you're a football club and you've talked to your league, so AFL Barwon or something like that. Just to know that they're a stakeholder, and it's great if you've got, you can get letters of support from them as well, that you've talked to council. Just detail that in the project, who you've talked to, what you've done. It's a little bit pretty much a few sentences on how you've gone about the project and who you've collaborated with. In the case of stakeholders, it could be other people within your building, for instance, that hire it as a subtenant or that sort of thing. And it might be if you're a club that has, and I use the example maybe of a seniors club that has a karate club come in 3 nights a week, or a judo club, or a dance club come in. So they're all stakeholders. Great to know that they know what's going on and they potentially benefit from your project. Another question on the application will be, what planning process have you undertaken to date? And this is specific to capital works, obviously. Now, we're talking about their building permits, planning and heritage permits, designs, the plans, who you've talked to as far as architects or engineers and builders. Have you had builders on site? Now, I'll go back to the building permit straight off. And look, we're not asking you to go out and get a building permit before you apply for the grants. What we're suggesting is that if you're not sure whether your project needs a building permit, contact the building services team and have a catch up with them and understand whether you do or you don't need it. There's a couple of critical things here. You may need to show them the plans to make sure there's no amendments to the plans that you might not have allowed for things like a accessible entrance or something like that might add a cost to your project. The other thing to note is that most council projects require that you have a commercial builder do the project and apply for the building permit. So just be aware of that. That's not something we can get out of. It's not necessarily something that we like, but we have no choice in it as part of the Building Act, that we have to have commercial builders on council buildings. So just keep that in mind if you are applying for a building project, that you haven't got a domestic builder that's going to run your project, and all of a sudden you get to the end and you find out it's going to cost you a lot more money because you've got to get a commercial builder in. As far as planning and heritage permits go, we'll probably have a fairly good idea if you need one when we meet on site. But there's also what we call a pre-application meeting that you can have with our planning department, just to make sure that there's no planning requirements. If you're on a council reserve, sports ground, that sort of thing, it's normally not required under $1 million for projects under $1 million, but just keep that in mind. It's always good to check these things and to know that you've gone through that process. Also, the same token with builders, having builders on site to understand the project. You're obviously going to need them to get quotes, but we want you to have talked to them, walked them through the project, understand what the pitfalls of the project may be and where the pinch points are. As far as the assessment criteria goes for a well-planned project, when we're assessing the project, we're looking at, from a budget point of view, we're looking for a detailed breakdown for the project, and that must be provided with your submission, and it identifies all funding sources and amounts and all the major activities and expenditure items. All amounts should be ex-GST. We say that because it gets very confusing with clubs that put a mixture of both, and some do and some don't, and some are exempt from GST and some clubs aren't. So we go with ex-GST and then we work it out from there, and we'll give you the right amount of money based on your GST component. An example budget breakdown has been provided in the grant application, and either utilise that or something else, but it'll give you an idea of what we're looking for as far as a breakdown goes. As far as the budget goes, also having all the quotes, the independent quantity surveyors report if it's required. If you're up on the dollar figures, it needs that. Refer to obviously the grant application form for the details on that, and note where the quotes or estimates do not match the total cost. We need an explanation for that. as far as within your submission. Now, as far as contingency goes, this is something very important, and it's something that we're mentioning this year because a lot of clubs don't do it. And it's really important when you're applying for a project to add some contingency to your project. We recommend about 10 to 20%, depending on the complexity of the project, but ensure that you do put that in your application. So you'll have your quotes, you'll have that, you'll either go for the quantity surveyors and then add that 10 to 20% for the things that may go wrong. You know, there's always little bits and pieces that you don't account for, that you're not really aware of, and all of a sudden the builder comes up to you and said, oh, well, I didn't account for that in it, that was excluded. Or it might be something like asbestos that was unknown. When you rip a wall off, you found an extra layer of asbestos in there that you didn't know about. So you have to get rid of it. It's going to cost the club more. The last thing we want to do when we're working with you on your project is not be able to help you complete your project because you haven't got any additional money. And these process, unfortunately, we expend all the dollars, so we don't have a bucket sitting there to help you out if you run short for something that was unforeseen circumstances. So I'd rather have you put something in there as far as a contingency. You certainly won't be marked down. There's some people, when they're applying for their grant, they tend to put down the smallest amount possible, or the smallest quote or the lowest quote, because they think that's the best chance of getting it. What we're looking for when we're looking at their projects and the planning of a project is looking that it's a reasonable cost item. And that's where I mentioned before about putting in the quantity surveyor's estimate, because we know that that's going to cover just about everything in it, and it may seem a little bit more, but what we're not about is getting projects half delivered. We're not looking at the dollar value when we're assessing your project to see. What we're looking for is that that it all balances up and the budget equals, and we have a good understanding of what it costs, and that you know what it's going to cost, and we're not leaving you short. And this was mentioned earlier about the project delivery. If your organisation proposes to deliver the work, you must provide a resume. In those circumstances, I think it was up to $150,000 or up to $350,000. So works between 25 and 150, or 25 and 350. You'll need to provide a resume of your project manager, and detail their experience in delivering projects of similar size and scale in the past. Alternatively, you can nominate council to deliver the project, and you won't be marked down or put to the bottom of the pile because you want council to deliver it. We're much more comfortable to have our project managers deliver a project and have a club that doesn't have the necessary skills to deliver a project get in trouble and put them under the pump. So we understand that the club's full of volunteers, and sometimes they just don't have someone either capable to do the project or has the time to do it. Now we move on to probably the second part, I suppose, of the application, and that's the community impact. This is where you need to tell us about how your project will provide a benefit to the community. And it's, as you can see by that, it's 55% of the scoring value on how much your project benefits the community. So the question will be, please describe how your project provides benefit to the community. Refer to the assessment indicators or the indicators in the assessment criteria. But what we're looking for is, examples of that, and you obviously expand on it a bit, but it's, these things and what you provide for the community better than us in some circumstances. But does your club, if you're a sporting club, you most certainly probably promote healthy eating and active lifestyle. That's great. How does it benefit the broader community? How does your club or activity benefit the community? Does it improve safety in the community? Does it build connections? As I said, they're the sort of things we're looking for. You all know them, and you all know what you do for the community in your individual clubs or groups, whether it be and I see there was a motorsports club here, but that's one activity, and you've got cricket clubs, you've got football clubs, and I think there was a couple of arts groups here. So, you all provide benefit to the community in different ways. What we're asking for here is what your specific project and how that will benefit the community and the people that use your building. The question in the application will be, who are the primary beneficiaries of this project? And you know, sometimes it's everybody in your group or club or organisation, but sometimes it's specific, and we're looking for those primary beneficiaries. It could be just the, in total the club members. It could be specific to juniors. It could be specific to the more senior people in your club or group. It could be targeted at the female members of your group or elderly. Just that's all we're looking for as far as the question, as far as the primary beneficiaries is going. Who is your project targeted at? And if it's specific, that's fine. If it's everybody, that's fine as well. And what is the estimated number of people you anticipate to be involved with your project and benefit from your project? That is not just the number of members you got. That can be expanded well above that to, you know, if you're a sporting club or even a community club that has sort of thing like that. It's, if you've got younger people within it, it's also the parents of those younger people that bring them and sit around watching participation. If it's sport, for instance, it's not only your members, but it's your parents that come along with those members. It's the other visiting participants. If a club or a group, and you might be a bowls club that has 3 or 4 competitions a week. Well, if you've got a project that's benefiting them, and it could be accessible toilets or whatever, all your participants that come and visit from other teams or areas all benefit from your project. If your project's available, or your building or activity has community availability, and there's opportunities for people from the community to either hire out your facility or use your facility, well, they're another people that you add to that number. And other users, as I said before, sometimes there's sporting clubs and groups that have a couple of arts groups, knitting clubs during the week when the building's empty. We want to know about those people because they benefit from your project as well. So don't forget about that. Don't think you can't tell us about the other people that you've got in your building. We want to know about those ones because the wider you spread and the wider your wings are out to people, the better your project is. And what's the social economic impact of the project? This question is looking at what will the project mean to your group and the community in specific, and how will it help? Will it increase revenue? Will it increase your ability to hold functions, which therefore increases revenue? Will it increase participation, if it may be in the case of sports lights or something like that? By increasing participation, will it decrease membership charges? So they're the sort of type of question where, or the type of answer we're looking for there. They're just some prompters for that. As I said, you'll know what it means to your club. Just work your way through that, and if you've got any questions, ask us. Now we move on to the environmental impact. This is always one of the ones that I find a little bit challenging in answering this with some projects, because the reality is that some construction projects, you probably won't be able to answer this question unless you tell a few fibs, but see how you go with it. Like I said, with the majority of projects not really scoring highly in this area, it doesn't mean that you're going to miss out because you couldn't answer this question. But examples that we tell people to do, if you're doing a lighting project, for instance, if you're using LED lighting, well, it's that's something you should mention here. If you're doing a building, we just use energy efficient devices within your extension or upgrade, I suppose. The sustainable design, things that you may do if you're doing a bathroom upgrade or change room upgrade. You might have shower heads that are all water efficient, that sort of thing. That's all you can look for there. You know, if it's a solar project, well, you've got it down pat. You've got this answer done and dusted as far as that goes, but see how you go with that. And like I said, it is challenging in some of your projects to answer this project, but don't be don't be overawed by the fact that and think you're going to miss out because you couldn't answer this question. It's just one of those ones that quite often, you know, all the projects come up very similar in score for it. But you know what, as far as that goes, you know, how will your project respond to that sustainability environment? Now, as far as the application goes, there are some optional funding themes this year, and it's worth a little bit extra on your score when we're assessing the project. So the first one is, will your project address access for all abilities, and how does your project encourage and support people with a disability to access, participate and feel included in the environment? Now, examples of these projects that you could answer and apply to this project are accessible toilets, accessible entrance ramps. If you're doing rather large projects, quite often your building permit will require that you need to put in accessible ramps anyway. So include that in and get yourself a little bit extra. Accessible toilets are quite often when you're doing projects that are larger extensions that require building permits, you need to modify your toilets to the new building codes. As far as the second optional funding theme, it's about your project and social inequity. So how will your initiative address social inequity? Examples of this is that if your club or group is located in a low socioeconomic area and you provide opportunities for the disadvantaged, or you're in an area with a new emerging community that you provide activities for, the area you're in may have a change in demographics. An example of that I always like to use is probably the Norlane North Shore area, where the demographics seem to have changed considerably now, where there's a lot more new arrivals in the area and that sort of thing. So that changes the whole aspect of your club or group and who your target members are. So this is an optional funding theme, like I said. So if you can answer the question, fantastic. If you can't, shouldn't be getting too worried about it. The optional question at the end, and is there anything more else you would like to say about your project? And I didn't say that very good, did I? Is there anything else you would like to say about your project or your application? This is the opportunity to add anything extra that will add an impact to your application. Is there anything you wanted to say throughout the application, but you didn't know where it fitted? It's just an opportunity to add some extra in there if you don't think you got your point across and you think there's a thing, or alternatively, it's an opportunity for you to just reiterate your key point and what the project means to you and what it means to your group or club. The application needs some budget information, and this is obviously, I mentioned this earlier about making sure that it all adds up. So what we want to see is your quotes or your expenditure, what you've put in for, how much you're requesting, how much you're contributing, if you've got any other grants and funding, and if they're confirmed. So we really do need to know if you're putting a grant and your project's reliant on a grant from somewhere else or another source and it hasn't been confirmed, we need to know about it to take in that assessment. It is critical. We do have plenty of examples of clubs or groups that have a certain amount of money, they're applied for a grant and they're hoping to get it, but they're relying on it. So the money sits there doing nothing when it could have gone to another group. So I know there's a little bit of what comes first, the chicken or the egg, but in this case, we do in most cases need the funding to be confirmed. And other income, where it's coming from. Just make sure everything as far as your balance sheet, that it all adds up. And if you go back to that budget information and have a look at that, it's really around that and making sure that the dollars add up. As far as the checklist goes, and this is at the start of the form, but I think it should be better at the end just to tick off, and something you should go back on and make sure that you've ticked every box as far as this goes. And if there's a reason why you haven't ticked a box, Just explain it at the bottom of the exactly why, because there could be a perfectly good reason, and they're fairly standard. Obviously, that you've read the standard guidelines, that your organisation is not for profit, that if you that your organisation is either an incorporated legal entity or a registered charitable organisation, or endorsed as a deductible gift recipient, or is auspiced by an incorporation or organisation. And if your organisation is using an auspice, that auspice has provided the authority to submit this application. That the project will take place in the City of Greater Geelong, and your organisation can demonstrate that they have no debts or arrears to the City of Greater Geelong. If you owe us money, we're not going to give you more. That you have appropriate insurance for this project, that you've discussed the project with your management and committee and have permission to apply for this grant. And I say this all the time, it seems obvious, but it wouldn't be the first time that someone's gone off and decided to apply for a grant and all of a sudden been successful, and they've got to go to the committee and tell them what they've done and tell them how much they've committed from the club. Sometimes the treasurer gets upset with that, so make sure you talk to your committee and they're on board about it. That you have an accurate understanding of the project, the cost of your project, and that you have an accurate understanding of how your project will be delivered. That you have not commenced your project prior to the awarding of the grant, and that's important, that we don't want to fund projects that are retrospective, so that you can't have started your project until you get the money. And that if you're a sporting club, that you do not have an unresolved breach of the Victorian Code of Community Sport. And obviously, as I mentioned before, if you're not ticked all of the above, just explain why. It could be a perfectly good reason. And I think I missed one there where we discussed the project with a relevant council officer, which we mentioned earlier in the presentation. And that's it as far as the presentation goes. So probably we'll see if there's any questions in the chat, and then we can open it up for anyone else that wants to ask a question.
Thanks, Paul. So we did have a question around the slides and whether the participants in this session could get a copy. So I've just popped a comment on there, and just for everyone's knowledge, we will be putting this presentation up on the Geelong Australia website. So over the next couple of weeks, you'll see it on there, and you can grab a copy, or you can share the link with your club members that might be assisting.
Yeah, we just had to get a decent run of it where we didn't make too many mistakes throughout it, so as we could put it up there as a video and not get embarrassed by ourselves and our own voice.
The other one in the chat at the moment is just asking if we can explain a little bit more around the auspice requirement.
Yeah, so look, I'm not an expert on this, but what it means is if you're not an incorporated body, that you need someone else that is an incorporated body to auspice it. Probably best case is to call the grants team to get that explained properly, because like I said, I'm not an expert on it. I just know it's a requirement, I suppose, if you're not a legal entity.
Yeah, and further to that too, Paul, leisure networks do a bit of work in this space for our clubs. So if you need to make contact or get further information, if the grants team doesn't quite answer the question you've got, leisure networks are happy to do one-on-one consultations with clubs to fully explain that and assist with grant writing as well. Next question, does a government school need an auspice?
I would question whether a government school, and I think it's you, Ken, asking that question, but I would question whether the Education Department could apply for this. I think it would, and if I'm thinking of the project that you're looking at, I think you would get the arts group or whatever it is, the performers, to apply for the grant themselves rather than the Education Department.
Okay.
Or
yep.
the club. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Well, if that's all the ones that are up on the chat, if there's any other, you can unmute your mics, and I'm happy to take some questions, or Scott's here too to take any questions. This might be a good sign that if there's no questions, maybe.
Hi, Paul, it's Damien. How are you?
How you going?
Yeah, good, good. The link for the apply for exemption,
Yep.
Whereabouts is that located?
You actually, it's not on a link. You need to contact the grants team,
Okay.
and they'll send you that application.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah. Just give Anna or Linda a call, and they will send one out to you.
Okay, or Linda.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Is there any other questions before we wrap it up? Well, I'll take that as a no. And all right, I'll take this opportunity to thank you for your time, and thanks for coming along, and wish you all the best with your grant application. And as we said earlier, if you've got any questions or need to know any more information, give the grants girls a call, and they'll organise someone to call you back. We've probably done it a little bit that way this year, rather than everybody going probably to me to get questions, and I'll never get time to ring you back. So if we go through that way, it just streamlines the process a little bit. But you know, yeah, as I said, thank you and good night.